The mafia boss father splurged $250,000 on a nanny for his son who would have thought he'd end up building a queen for his empire. People, the most bitter thing isn't that the eldest brother Matteo betrayed us by sending assassins to kill his own brother. The most terrifying thing is that Leo discovers his own father is secretly sending money to cover up for the enemy who wants to kill him, but he coldly considers this betrayal merely a piece of data to end the relationship. An entire blood-soaked kingdom was ultimately saved by an embrace under a heavy weighted blanket in a dark cellar.
A dense, menacing silence consumed the ballroom at the Pierre Hotel. Before 300 of New York's most formidable criminals, a young woman, Harper Davis, accepted the hand of Leo Moretti, the 24-year-old autistic son of the city's preeminent Don. For years, Leo existed as a phantom, absent from his father's domain and isolated from society. Yet Harper perceived a man overwhelmed by a sensory tempest, not the scion of a criminal dynasty. By inviting him to dance, she had just upended the underworld's entire brutal hierarchy. The event was the annual Moretti Foundation Gala, a performance of philanthropy for the year 2024. Men who forged empires from fear, clad in Tom Ford, presented six-figure donations to pediatric hospitals. The atmosphere was a dazzling fusion of diamonds, champagne, and concealed firearms. Harper Davis was merely staff stationed near an ice sculpture. At 26, she was a chaperone for the event firm, not a guest, hired to resolve minor issues. This dreadful weekend assignment was funding her master's degree and a significant amount of student debt. From her position, Harper could observe the entire predatory hierarchy. The apex predator, Dominic Moretti, commanded attention by the bar, his demeanor cold and strategic. At his side was his eldest Matteo, the volatile heir who possessed his father's savagery but lacked his restraint. He laughed excessively, drank too quickly, and gripped politicians' hands with menacing pressure. But the individual who captured Harper's focus was a solitary figure in the shadows. This was Leo Moretti, 24, strikingly handsome, sharing the sharp jawline of his brother. Yet the familial similarity was superficial. While Matteo drew energy from the room's chaotic pulse, Leo was being crushed by it. He sat with a rigid posture, his shoulders stooped as if bearing an immense, invisible burden. His suit was immaculate, yet he frayed its edges, his fingers in a state of perpetual anxious motion. Harper recognized the indicators immediately. Her own younger brother was on the spectrum. She was fluent in the signs of a sensory overload. Leo wore noise-dampening earplugs, but they were insufficient for this environment. The ballroom was his own private auditory hell. A 12-member jazz ensemble played a loud Sinatra arrangement. Hundreds of conversations echoed from the high ceiling. The sound of clinking glasses, sharp peals of laughter, the thick mixture of perfume and cooked food. It was a sensory onslaught. What disturbed Harper more, though, was his calculated isolation. Leo's table was a void. Captains, city officials, and their spouses behaved as if he were not present, their gazes sliding past him. Periodically, someone would whisper behind a hand, casting him a glance of either pity or utter disdain. They rendered the Don's younger son invisible to avoid displeasing Dominic. Matteo, consuming a scotch, strode past his brother's table without a look, focused on charming a senator. Leo's rising panic was evident. His breathing grew shallow. His fidgeting increased. He began pressing his palms into his thighs, his frame rocking almost imperceptibly. His eyes were clamped shut. To others, he might appear reserved or intoxicated. To Harper, he looked on the verge of splintering. She grasped precisely what a public decompensation would entail. The quiet murmurs would escalate into open staring. These hardened criminals would interpret it as a weakness in the Moretti lineage. Matteo would exploit it to bolster his own position. And Leo would be left utterly humiliated, exposed to the cruel scrutiny of his father's world. Harper, check the roast, her manager, Madeline, commanded, hurrying past. And for God's sake, don't look at the family. Wait, Madeline, Harper said softly. The younger Moretti is in distress. The music is overwhelming. A light above him is flickering. He needs a quiet room immediately. Madeline halted abruptly, her face turning ashen. She seized Harper's arm, her nails pressing into her skin. Are you out of your mind? You don't look at Leo Moretti? You don't speak to him? The Dawn displays him for precisely 1 hour to confirm his existence. Then his security detail removes him. Stand down. They will destroy your life, Harper. I am serious. Madeline pushed her towards the buffet stations and vanished. Harper attempted to comply, but her gaze kept returning to Leo's corner. His rocking was more pronounced now. He was tapping a frantic, distinct pattern on his temple. Tap, tap, pause, tap, tap, tap. It was his final, failing effort to maintain his composure. The band's brass section hit a piercing high note. Leo flinched as if struck, tipping over his water glass. The sound was minuscule in the vast room, yet heads swiveled instantly. A wave of murmurs spread through the attendees. One of Dominic's men, Silas, began to approach, hand on his earpiece, but he hesitated, uncertain how to manage the Dawn's untouchable son. Leo was motionless, his stare fixed on the shattered glass. A choked sound escaped him. The panic was consuming him, trapping him inside the sensory hurricane. Harper acted without considering the repercussions. She didn't think about her job, Madeline's caution, or the genuine threat of crossing these men. She only saw a person at the edge needing to be brought back. She grabbed a clean napkin from a service cart and walked directly into the eye of the storm. The brief journey from the buffet to Leo's table was like navigating a minefield. Harper maintained a steady, calm pace, avoiding any abrupt actions. As she neared, adjacent tables grew quiet. The frigid stare of every mobster in that area was fixed on her. She felt the immense weight of their collective scrutiny, but concentrated solely on the broken glass. She knelt beside his table, maintaining a deliberate distance. She intentionally averted her gaze from his face, aware that direct eye contact could feel like an assault to someone so overwhelmed. "Let me clear this away," Harper said. Her voice was low and steady, lacking the patronizing tone people likely used with him. She addressed him as an equal. With the napkin, she carefully gathered the larger fragments of glass. Peripherally, she saw Leo observing her hands, his breathing still irregular. "That brass section is far too aggressive," Harper noted casually, her eyes remaining lowered. "And the lamp in that sconce is flickering at roughly 40 hertz. It's highly distracting." Leo's restless fingers stilled. He tilted his head slightly in her direction. It likely never occurred to him that another person would even perceive the light. 42 hertz, Leo corrected. His voice, deep and raspy from disuse, was remarkably exact. A faint smile appeared on Harper's lips as she finally looked up, directing her gaze to his chin. 42? You have a sharper eye than hotel maintenance. She rose, the broken glass contained in the napkin. At that moment, the music shifted to a slow, methodical, and perfectly arranged waltz. It was pure mathematics. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. You are overloaded, Harper diagnosed, not inquired. The sound isn't being processed. It's an impenetrable wall of noise. Leo gave a sharp nod, his hands still shaking. It's excessive data. I require a singular focal point, Harper continued. A physical anchor to organize the sensory input, a repetitive motion. Her next action was entirely instinctual. Perhaps it was fury at witnessing 300 people watch a man disintegrate. Perhaps it was a fierce, sudden impulse to shield him. Harper moved around the spilled water and positioned herself directly before him. She extended her hand. "Just count the rhythm with me," she said. "It's 3/4 time. It is perfectly logical. It will silence everything else." Leo simply stared at her outstretched hand. For one agonizingly long moment, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. At the surrounding tables, all conversation had died. Silas, the bodyguard, advanced, his expression one of sheer panic. "Ma'am, move away from him immediately," Silas commanded. Harper paid him no mind. Her hand remained in place, her expression serene. "It is only an invitation, Leo. You are free to decline." Leo's gaze shifted from her hand to her face. He found no pity there. He found no fear. He found an escape route. Then, very deliberately, he extended his own hand. So, Harper clasped his hand, and his hold was one of pure, desperate need. She somehow managed to get this rigid, 6'2" man to his feet. She murmured, "1 foot, then the other. 1, 2, 3. She guided him onto the dance floor in full view, and Leo moved with the lumbering, hesitant step, his eyes fixed on his feet. Harper instructed him, "Feel my hand, ignore the noise, and count with me." And he complied, his voice repeating, 1, followed by a step. 2. The third beat shatters the room's unspoken code. Across the floor, Matteo Moretti witnesses the scene, and a fuse ignites in his mind at the image of his damaged brother being guided by an insignificant woman. This affront to the family's delicate honor sparks a visible eruption of rage. Then the patriarch, Dominic Moretti, turns his head, and the entire room becomes motionless. The celebratory music fades, leaving only the unaware orchestra playing into a profound silence. With a single, minute gesture, Dominic stays his men, demonstrating that he alone holds command. Under his watch on the dance floor, Leo begins to subtly transform. The subject's acute sympathetic nervous system response began to de-escalate. The structured tactile guidance provided by Harper served as a regulatory anchor, mitigating the internal sensory storm. A cessation of somatic tremors and the lifting of his gaze signaled this neurophysiological shift. 90 beats per minute, Leo stated, his vocalization demonstrating renewed cognitive focus. "The ideal tempo," Harper affirmed, providing positive reinforcement. "See, it comes naturally." He then disclosed a key trauma, a history of tactile deprivation, referencing familial diagnoses of being damaged or born broken. A micro-expression of distress tightened Harper's jaw. "Your mind is not broken, Leo. It's structured for a different function, to perceive concepts they cannot." Her cognitive reframing precipitated a breakthrough. He established direct eye contact. Within his hazel eyes, the architecture of a superior intellect was observable beneath the anxious facade. The ambient music ceased, replaced by the focused observation of 300 individuals. Harper disengaged his hand, creating deliberate interpersonal space. "Is that better?" she asked. Leo assessed his own hand, then the onlookers, exhibiting lucid awareness without the typical panic response. He offered Harper a minute, genuine nod. "Better?" A single slow clap fractured the silence. The crowd parted, forming a corridor for Dominic Moretti's purposeful advance toward them. The ambient temperature seemed to plummet. He was flanked by Matteo, whose clenched fists broadcasted imminent aggression. The confidence Harper had felt moments before collapsed into a primal somatic fear. She had made contact with the untouchable son of the city's apex predator. Dominic halted 2 feet away, his presence exuding an aura of smoke, power, and overwhelming pressure. His focus bypassed Leo entirely. His cold, analytical gaze was fixed exclusively on Harper. "Your name?" Dominic's low voice commanded, the words sharp in the profound quiet. "Harper Davis, sir," she responded, exerting control over a tremor in her voice. "I'm with the event staff." At his father's side, Mateo sneered. "A waitress? This nobody touched my brother. Dad, handle her. Let Silas demonstrate the consequences of crossing us." A wave of cold terror confirmed for Harper the lethal intent behind the threat. At that moment, Leo repositioned his body. Though the action was subtle, he angled himself to physically screen Harper, inserting his presence between her and his brother. "She was helping Mateo," Leo stated. His tone was flat, yet the gesture was a radical act of defiance. Mateo's jaw dropped in disbelief. Leo's passivity was a foundational element of their family dynamic. A hand signal from Dominic preempted Mateo's retort. The patriarch observed his younger son, noting the regulated posture in the absence of his typical agitated state. His gaze snapped back to Harper. "Upstairs, my office. Now," Dominic commanded. He pivoted and departed. A large operative, identified as Silas, materialized beside Harper, his hand enclosing her bicep. "Let's go," he growled. "My things?" Harper began, her composure finally fracturing. "Move," Silas reiterated, his grip a painful ultimatum. He escorted her from the ballroom, through heavy double doors, and into a private elevator. He stood as a silent, intimidating presence while her cognitions raced. This is the precipice. I touched a crime lord. I exposed a fissure in his dynasty. I am about to be erased. An image of her small apartment, her debts, and her brother's photograph flashed through her mind. The elevator doors opened into the penthouse, an environment saturated with visible security assets. Men in tailored suits were stationed along the corridors. Silas propelled her into a large, dimly lit office where Dominic Moretti was decanting a dark liquor into a glass. He did not extend the gesture to her. After taking a seat behind an imposing desk, he dismissed Silas and had the door secured. The lock's click resonated like a firearms action. "Sit," he ordered. Harper complied, sinking into a leather chair. He took a drink, his eyes conducting a slow, silent evaluation. "My son, Leo," he stated, his words clinical and devoid of affection, "has been assessed by top specialists from Zurich to Manhattan. They prescribe pharmaceuticals. They advise me to sequester him. They classify him as a liability." Harper found her professional voice. "Sir, respectfully, they diagnose it as an illness. Autism is not a pathology. It is a different processing system. Leo requires a modified environment, a method to decode a world that is screaming at him." A minute shift occurred in Dominic's expression. "You hold a strong opinion for a caterer." "My master's degree is in occupational therapy," Harper retorted, driven by a survival instinct. "I focus on sensory integration. This position services my student loans." Dominic leaned back, constructing a steeple with his fingers. "Fascinating. Then tell me, miss." "Davis, what was your clinical observation of tonight?" Harper paused, recognizing the query as a high-stakes test. The truth carried extreme risk, but a lie would be transparently false. Honesty was the only viable strategy. I observed an individual experiencing a sensory cascade event with no one providing a de-escalation protocol, she stated plainly. That ballroom was a sensory assault. The photic stimulation, the auditory spikes, his social isolation. It was a formula for system overload. The dance provided a predictable, rhythmic structure. It offered him a point of regulation. Dominic remained silent, his gaze fixed on the city lights beyond her. This family is approaching a state of conflict, Miss Davis. My own control is diminishing, he confessed, the disclosure itself a dangerous gambit. Mateo has tactical force, but no strategic acumen. He initiates conflict when we require diplomacy. He views Leo as a defect in our lineage. Harper's brow furrowed. Why are you disclosing this to me? Dominic leaned forward, placing his palms on the desk. Because a power struggle is imminent within these walls. Upon my death, Mateo assumes control. When that occurs, he will either permanently institutionalize Leo or take more decisive action to eliminate what he considers our family's greatest weakness. Harper inhaled sharply. That's monstrous. That is our reality, Dominic stated, his voice flat and cold. I require Leo to be functional, not merely for social functions, but for the enterprise. His aptitude for numbers, for pattern recognition, it is a profound asset. He identifies anomalies in ledgers my most experienced men overlook, but he cannot articulate his findings. The social pressure is too great. The personnel are too stimulating. Dominic retrieved a thick envelope and slid it across the desk, where it landed with an air of finality. I am presenting you with an offer, he declared. Your current employment is terminated. You will now become Leo's full-time behavioral strategist, his interpreter, his handler. The title is your own to create. You will teach him to navigate this world without systemic collapse. You will be present at every dinner, every meeting, every event. Harper's gaze was locked on the envelope. You are asking me to work for you? I am asking you to ensure my son's survival, Dominic corrected, his tone low and resonant. Inside is a check for $250,000. It is a signing incentive. Your debts are cleared. Your weekly compensation is $10,000. You will reside here. And if I decline, Harper whispered, her heart rate accelerating. Dominic's expression was unreadable, but the room's atmosphere grew colder. You entered a highly volatile situation tonight, Miss Davis, and you placed your hands on my son. You publicly compromised my heir in front of 300 of our associates. From Mateo's perspective, you are now a liability that must be neutralized, and he is methodical about neutralizing liabilities. The oxygen in Harper's lungs felt thin. This was not a job offer, it was a gilded cage marketed as a sanctuary. Work for me, and you fall under my protection. Mateo will not approach you, Dominic proposed, his voice smooth. But if you exit this office unescorted, you will not survive to reach the street. Her focus dropped to the envelope. She pictured Leo's desperate state, a brilliant mind trapped by chaos. She pictured Mateo's homicidal expression. She had stumbled into their world, and the exit had just been sealed. With a trembling hand, Harper drew the envelope to her side of the desk. A cold, predatory smile formed on Dominic's lips. Welcome to the family, Miss Davis. The Moretti compound at Oyster Bay was less a residence and more a fortress disguised as a mansion. 12-foot iron gates with pillars concealing biometric sensors guarded the entrance. Beyond them lay 40 acres of manicured grounds, a a private dock on the cold Atlantic, and a manor constructed from limestone and ballistic glass. For 3 weeks, Harper Davis existed as a ghost within this opulent prison. Her new reality consisted of a luxury suite, a bank account she dared not access, and a singular objective: to re-engineer the psyche of a crime lord's sequestered son. To start, Harper's protocol involved deconstructing Leo's environment. Dominic had granted her total control over his youngest son's life, a move that bred a silent, acidic resentment among the household staff. Harper began by neutralizing the sensory antagonists in Leo's study. The dissonant frequency of fluorescent bulbs was replaced with custom lighting of a warm, adjustable hue. She installed heavy velvet curtains to block the harsh morning light and the disruptive sound of the family helicopter. Critically, she imposed a rigid temporal structure. For a mind like Leo's, unpredictability was a neurotoxin. Routine was the only antidote. At 2 p.m. on a Tuesday, Harper entered the controlled environment she had constructed. The room, bathed in a soft amber light, carried the scent of cedarwood. Seated there at an expansive mahogany desk, Leo was immersed in leather-bound volumes and the glow of 2 monitors. He offered no visible reaction to her presence, but a nearly imperceptible drop in his shoulders was, to Harper's analysis, a profound event. He was beginning to accept her into his ordered existence. "Your baseline, please," she requested quietly, settling into an armchair opposite him. Leo pressed 2 fingers to his wrist to find the pulse. 72 beats per minute. It is within nominal parameters. A faint smile touched Harper's lips. Good. She withdrew a heavy, slate-colored blanket from her case. "I'm introducing a new variable. This is a weighted blanket containing 20 pounds of fine glass beads. During episodes of sensory overload, its deep pressure offers the brain proprioceptive input. It anchors the psyche to the physical form, thereby neutralizing anxiety." Leo paused his task, his gaze fixed on the object. Surprise flickered across his face, but he was a man swayed only by demonstrable fact, and Harper's logic was always sound. "So it operates as a somatic anchor for the nervous system?" "Precisely," she concurred, placing it on a corner of his desk. "Employ it when the informational input becomes overwhelming." Leo's gaze met hers, his typically shifting hazel eyes now holding a startling, focused clarity. "The data is a perpetual vortex, Harper, and this vortex is propagating a falsehood." A line appeared on her brow as she leaned in. "What falsehood?" He turned a screen toward her, showing a complex matrix of logistics and code for the Port of Newark, a key channel for the Moretti Syndicate. "My father believes this administrative task keeps me docile," Leo stated, his speech quickening to a detached, rapid analysis. "But numbers possess their own syntax. They adhere to logic, and this syntax has been violated." His slender finger traced a single column. "Cargo weights, shipments from Rotterdam for the last 14 months. The manifests declare 30 tons of olive oil and textiles per container. Yet fuel consumption data for the departing trucks, which I extracted from our internal network, indicate they are hauling loads nearer to 40 tons. A chilling comprehension dawned on Harper. They are transporting a commodity with a far higher density. "Weaponry," Leo said, his tone devoid of emotion, "or unrefined narcotics. But that is not the chief inconsistency." "My father ceased all arms trafficking 6 months ago as a gesture of goodwill to the federal authorities. The actual issue is the revenue stream." With several keystrokes, he accessed a secure file. The ledgers only reflect income from 30 tons of legitimate goods. the 10-ton excess of illicit, high-value cargo simply evaporates from the financial statements. The funds never reach my father's primary accounts. "Someone is conducting a ghost operation," Harper whispered as the scheme's dreadful outline emerged. "An individual is using his father's network to run a personal enterprise and is stealing 100% of the income. $32.4 million in 14 months, Leo specified. "Who is your father's chief operator at the Newark port?" Leo's eyes finally rose from the display. His face was an impassive mask, but his fingers tapped a frenetic, silent rhythm on his thigh. Mateo. The name filled the silence, and Harper felt her own heart pause. Mateo was more than a subordinate. He was betraying his own kin. In their world, that was the one sin punishable by death, even for a son. If Mateo discovered his supposedly fragile brother could unravel his clandestine operation, Leo would be neutralized. "Is your father aware?" Harper's voice was strained. "No," Leo answered flatly. "Mateo is the designated successor. I am the defective variable." Lacking irrefutable physical proof presented to his captains, Mateo can simply classify me as unstable. My father will align with his functional son, not his fractured one. In that moment, Harper saw not a broken man, but a brilliant intellect adrift among predators and utterly exposed to their machinations. "Very well," Harper said, rising to her feet. She moved behind him, draping the heavy blanket across his shoulders. He tensed for an instant, but as the 20 pounds of deep pressure settled, a long-held breath escaped him. "We will not inform your father. Not yet," Harper pledged, her voice turning to steel. "We first acquire the evidence. We construct a case that is irrefutable." 2 weeks later, the delicate equilibrium they had built was shattered. Dominic Moretti collapsed in his study, clutching his chest. The cardiac event was minor, but it sent a tremor through the foundations of the entire criminal enterprise. The invincible Don was fallible, and the predators began to circle. An old adversary, Declan Hayes, the formidable Irishman controlling the Boston ports, sensed weakness and insisted on a meeting. Hayes alleged that the Morettis had defrauded him in a significant joint venture routed through Newark. Mateo, as the family's acting head, instantly deflected the accusation onto Hayes' own people, escalating them toward open conflict. Yet Dominic, from his sickbed, commanded Mateo to de-escalate. He insisted on a summit on neutral territory, and to everyone's shock, demanded Leo's presence. "He will audit their ledgers during the negotiations," Dominic rasped through an oxygen mask, his eyes fixed on an incensed Mateo. "If Hayes is fabricating this, Leo will detect the numerical flaw. He will be present." And so Harper found herself in the rear of an armored Cadillac, speeding toward a derelict meat-packing facility in the Bronx. Beside her, Leo sat erect in a tailored black suit, emitting a low hum of anxiety. Their destination threatened a full-scale sensory assault. "Leo, focus on me," Harper said gently, drawing his attention from the chaotic blur of lights beyond the tinted glass. He turned. He wore the discreet, custom-molded earplugs she had provided, designed to dampen jarring sounds while allowing speech to be heard. "Let's review the protocol," she said, taking his hand. It was no longer a question. Physical contact was now their primary defensive measure. When sensory input becomes excessive, what is the signal? "2 compressions," Leo answered, his voice tight. "Index finger on thumb. You will approach me. You will apply deep, consistent pressure to my left shoulder." And if Hayes becomes verbally hostile, I will deconstruct the rhythmic structure of his speech, disregarding volume, Leo recited. I will enumerate his vowel sounds. Correct, Harper affirmed, her grip on his hand tightening. You will not destabilize Leo. You comprehend these numbers in a way they cannot. They are engaged in a primitive contest. You operate on a plane of existence they are not even aware of. The Escalade glided into the vast vacant loading dock. The air was frigid, thick with the smell of rust, chemicals, and old blood. A discordant hum emanated from the sodium lamps above. Harper observed Leo flinch, his eyes squeezing shut against the harsh light. Stay with me, Harper murmured, placing a hand on the small of his back as they emerged. Silas and 4 additional armed Moretti soldiers formed a protective formation around them. Matteo strode ahead, a perfect embodiment of arrogant hostility. They were guided into an immense, reverberating cold room where a long steel table awaited. At its far end sat Declan Hayes, flanked by men who looked as if they were sculpted from pure menace. Hayes was a towering figure with a wild beard and disturbingly vacant eyes. Matteo? His voice ricocheted off the steel walls like a gunshot. Where is the old man? Did he send his whelps to conduct a man's affairs? My father is occupied, Matteo retorted, seating himself at the table's end. I represent the family now, and I say your Irish curs owe us $12 million for the shipment you purloined. That is a fabrication, Hayes thundered, his massive fist striking the steel. The sound was a deafening report. Leo recoiled sharply, a choked noise escaping him as he began to rock. Positioned behind his chair, Harper instantly applied deep, grounding pressure to his shoulders. Breathe, she commanded, tapping his collarbone twice. Matteo cast a look of utter contempt over his shoulder. Remove that malfunctioning subject from my vicinity. Harper ignored the outburst, her tone a low frequency, intended solely for Leo. Focus on the data, Leo. Only the columns matter. A thick file was presented by Hayes. Your shipping logs, Matteo, all accounted for. Your personnel oversaw the consignment. If it vanished, your own men benefited. Matteo seized the documents, his gaze lost in the inked rows. He knew weapons, not accounting. These are fabrications, he countered weakly. They are flawless. A sharp, analytical voice cut through the room's ambient stress. Within the chamber, all attention converged on Leo. His physical movements had ceased. He was processing the documents, reading them inverted from across the table. A deep flush appeared on Matteo's neck, a physiological stress response. Cease your input, Leo. Let the subject speak, Hayes countered, his expression shifting to one of clinical interest. Leo processed neither command. He perceived only the numerical data. The numbers formed a pattern. The numbers were absolute. The manifests are accurate for the declared cargo, Leo stated, his cadence increasing. The vessel Oceanic Star, Pier 44, Tuesday the 12th. 300 mechanized units. However, the recorded tonnage is a physical paradox. When Leo rises, the room's agitation ceases. He moves to the table with predatory economy, taking the documents from a non-responsive Matteo. The subject's cognitive capacity becomes apparent. Observe page 4, the fuel manifests. Leo states, his digit tracing the data. Each vehicle was allocated fuel for 40 tons, not the recorded 30. Garage logs, which I audit weekly, confirm suspension compression consistent with 42 tons. He meets Declan Hayes' gaze, delivering his conclusion. Your cargo was never delivered, Mr. Hayes. It was diverted within our own territory. The diversion point. Hayes questions, his skepticism replaced by clinical interest. Warehouse 7 in Red Hook. Leo answers without pause. The property is leased to a shell company, Vanguard Logistics. Their offshore encryption, which I compromised yesterday, revealed sole ownership by Matteo Moretti. The resulting silence is absolute. The ambient light's hum becomes intrusive. Exhibiting classic narcissistic rage, Matteo lunges across the table, vocalizing, "You lying, fractured freak." Silas intercepts him midair, a firearm targeting Matteo's chest. The Irish respond by drawing weapons. The situation escalates toward mass violence. "Hold," Hayes commands, his voice a powerful counter-stimulus as he stands. Hayes processes the new data, observing both Matteo and Leo. An individual with his experience in deception recognized the tonality of empirical truth. The evidence suggests, Matteo, you embezzled from your own organization and instigated conflict to conceal the crime. Matteo, hypoxic, surveys the room as the construct of the deception becomes clear to him. His assessment of his brother's capabilities was a fatal miscalculation. Our business is concluded, Hayes states, directing his subordinates to stand down. Control your liability, Moretti. If Dominic fails to sanitize his house, I will. He and his retinue then exit, leaving the Moretti family unit to implode. Matteo's gaze toward Leo projects extreme hostility, a palpable contaminant in the room. You have initiated a terminal conflict, brother, Matteo verbalizes before forcing past Silas and fleeing. Harper approaches Leo, making physical contact. The dissipation of adrenaline induces a severe somatic tremor in the subject. The objective is complete, Leo. She affirms the execution was flawless. She observed the vacant exit, aware this was merely an initial phase in a deadlier engagement. The repercussions were swift but suboptimal. Confronted with the evidence, Dominic exhibited a stress fracture response. Compromised by paternal instinct, he restricted his elder son to the property, removing his security detail, pending further verification. This judgment proved to be a critical failure. Dominic acted from a paternal framework, while Matteo operated from a survivalist, fight-or-flight paradigm. 3 nights later, a severe weather event impacts the coast with high precipitation and wind. A power failure plunges the residents into darkness before backup generators engage. Harper is in her quarters when an auditory report, likely a gunshot, penetrates the storm's ambient noise. The sound is distorted, but its implication is clear. Her physiological response is immediate, increased heart rate and motor activation. She proceeds on instinct, moving into the darkened corridor, her bare feet contacting the cold marble surface. Matteo had initiated an internal insurrection, securing the allegiance of nearly half the security staff. This constituted a total mutiny. Harper finds Leo's study unoccupied. A search of his bedroom yields the same result. The onset of acute anxiety is noted. "Leo!" she vocalizes, her voice competing with the storm. She locates him in the basement sensory deprivation room, a space of refuge converted into an instrument of torment. The adjacent generator shows signs of intentional sabotage. Sound-dampening panels were removed from the walls. A high-frequency metallic sound emanated from the generator, causing auditory distress. Strobe lights were positioned to create disorienting, arrhythmic flashes. The assault was engineered to induce sensory overload. The objective was not merely termination, but psychological deconstruction. Leo is observed in a fetal position, applying pressure to his auditory canals and sealing his eyes. His respiration is shallow and rapid, accompanied by continuous, low-volume vocalizations of distress. The subject is experiencing a severe autistic shutdown, rendering him unresponsive within the hostile sensory environment. "Leo!" Harper calls, entering his proximity. She uses her body as a physical barrier. "It is me. I am here." The ambient mechanical noise masks her words. He exhibits uncontrolled motor movements, his overwhelmed state preventing recognition of her intervention. An undirected strike connects with Harper's mandible, causing a momentary visual disturbance, but she maintains her grip. Recognizing verbal communication was ineffective, she prioritized mitigating the sensory attack. Harper retrieves a weighted blanket, enveloping them both to create a sensory shield. The dense fabric negates the strobing visual stimuli and dampens the auditory assault. Within this enclosure, the atmosphere grows warm and oxygen-thin, yet secure. Harper applies deep pressure therapy, securing Leo's torso against her own and interlacing their lower limbs. She maintains consistent, firm pressure. "Synchronize your breathing to mine," she instructs, speaking directly into his ear. She initiates a slow, rhythmic respiratory pattern, offering a tangible anchor for his disassociated state. "Inhale, exhale. I am your anchor, Leo. Focus on me." For approximately 10 minutes, external chaos continued. Within their micro-environment, however, a two-person system existed. Gradually, the subject's tremors subsided. His muscle rigidity decreased. The distress vocalizations ceased, replaced by deep, irregular respirations. His body mass relaxed against hers as the seizure-like state concluded. "Harper," he vocalized, his tone strained. "I am present," she confirmed, her lacrimal secretions mingling with his perspiration. "I will not withdraw." Within the sensory void, Leo initiated an unprecedented action. His hand, exhibiting a fine tremor, made contact with her face. He sustained the contact. His thumb stroked the contusion on her jaw, a non-verbal expression of remorse. "You remained," Leo stated, the utterance freighted with a history of abandonment. "All others withdraw." You remained in the negative space. "Dull. My presence in the negative space with you will be constant, Leo," Harper pledged, experiencing a paradoxical emotional response to the subject's vulnerability and emergent attachment. The interpersonal dynamic had been fundamentally restructured. The established roles of clinician and patient, or guardian and charge, were dissolved by the intensity of the shared trauma. This event transcended mere survival, forging a primary, unbreakable connection. Abruptly, the auditory and visual stimuli ceased. Footfalls descended the stairs. The door was forced open. Harper's posture became rigid, her grasp on Leo intensifying in anticipation of a terminal threat. The blanket was removed. Silas was present, blood-spattered and armed. His assessment of the tableau registered with a brief expression of newfound respect. "The insurrection is neutralized," Silas reported, his respiration strained. "Loyalist forces prevailed. Mateo escaped via a marine route." He extended his hand to Leo. "Your father is secure, but his condition is deteriorating. Mateo's defection creates a power vacuum." Leo's focus shifted from Silas's hand to Harper. His prior fear state was replaced by a clinical, inflexible determination. The internal sensory chaos had resolved, leaving a purely analytical cognition uniquely suited to power dynamics. He rejected the physical assistance, rising autonomously and bringing Harper with him. He maintained physical contact with her. "There are protocols to enact," Leo stated, his vocal tone exhibiting a complete lack of affect. "Bring me to my father." The transfer of power within the Moretti organization was not concluded by violence, but by an audit. Dominic Moretti was covertly transferred to a secure medical facility, his cardiac decline accelerated by the stress of his son's betrayal. Competing criminal syndicates observed, anticipating organizational collapse. Rival New York families prepared to claim territory. They incorrectly hypothesized that the neurologically atypical younger son would be neutralized by his own subordinates. Their analysis failed to model the architecture of Leo's cognition. On Thursday, Leo convened the 6 senior Kappa regimes in a meeting room on the 42nd floor of a midtown high-rise. Harper positioned herself near the windows, an observer of the urban network below. Her professional attire conveyed an unspoken authority. Her role had evolved beyond that of a handler. She was now the gatekeeper to the new leadership. Leo occupied the primary seat. Auditory dampeners isolated him from external stimuli, his posture perfectly composed. His authority was not contingent on vocal amplitude. A complex digital map of the East Coast appeared on the monitor, layered with real-time financial data streams. Leo addressed the room, his vocal delivery calm in contrast to the ambient tension. My brother, Matteo, operated on the principle that fear was our primary asset. This premise is flawed. Our primary asset is data. Vincent Romano, a traditionalist captain from Astoria, expressed derision non-verbally. With due respect, Leo, data analysis doesn't eliminate threats. Matteo is recruiting. The Genovese family is already encroaching on our queen's territory. So we require kinetic force, not abstract modeling. Leo's focus fixed on Vincent. He depressed a single key. The display changed, revealing Vincent's complete money laundering operation, from its front businesses to the specific routing numbers of his Swiss accounts. Vincent exhibited a sudden pallor. The room fell silent. "Your shadow ledger contained a 3% discrepancy last fiscal year, Vincent," Leo observed, his tone incongruously neutral. "You have been misappropriating approximately $400,000 annually to fund a property in Boca Raton for your paramour." Subject Matteo's methodology would involve a simple bullet. However, a corpse presents no revenue, and rebuilding the subject's network carried a projected cost of $1.2 million. Vincent's physiological stress response was acute, his hands exhibiting violent tremors. "Leo, The subject interjected, his vocal tone clinical and sharp. "The organization will be reimbursed with a 10% surcharge for your avarice. You will then re-architect your fronts utilizing the blockchain protocol on your device. It will increase your operational capacity by 14%, which will resolve the discrepancy." Leo's gaze then performed a cold, silent assessment of all other individuals in the room. Your ego is irrelevant. Your territorial disputes are irrelevant. My sole objective is systemic profit. Any individual who compromises the systems I construct will not be terminated. They will be methodically erased. I will liquidate your assets, inform the IRS of your offshore accounts, and place a call to Agent Thomas Kessler at the FBI. You will expire penniless in a federal institution. It was a clinical, deeply disquieting form of psychological execution. Harper observed as the captains physically recoiled. Leo had circumvented their primitive force and targeted their actual vulnerability, their digital records. He had just converted a crime syndicate into a hyper-efficient, ruthless corporation. Following the exhibition, the captains departed in a state of shock and fear. Their allegiance was not earned. It was compelled by the chilling certainty that Leo Moretti was a system they could not defeat. The moment the heavy doors secured, the psychological weight on the subject became observable. He collapsed, his hands gripping the table for stability. The city's ambient hum seemed to resonate through the glass from 40 floors below. Harper was instantly at his side. She did not offer sympathy. She became his stabilizing agent, her hands applying grounding pressure to his shoulders. 72 beats per minute, she vocalized, her cheek close to his. You maintained composure, Leo. They are in a state of terror. He sealed his eyes shut, yielding to her regulating touch. The influx of sensory data was a severe neurological assault. Vincent's cologne, the projector's drone, the subtle cadence of their elevated heart rates. Their scent profile was stale tobacco and fear, but you processed it, Harper murmured, her fingers mitigating the tension in his neck. Leo rotated his head just enough to take her hand, his thumb stroking her knuckles. I processed it because you were in my visual field. You were the sole constant in the variable set, Harper. When the input degrades to noise, I locate your pulse. I locate your respiration. Harper felt her own breathing cease. The professional boundary they had so carefully maintained had disintegrated. She met his gaze, observing the raw, unshielded individual he concealed from all others. I am no longer just your anchor, am I? She inquired softly. Leo rose, bringing her up with a deliberate strength, telegraphing his every action to prevent a startled response. You ceased being an anchor the day you invited me to dance, Harper. You are the only person who ever observed a malfunctioning machine and perceived a man inside. He cradled her face, his large hands preternaturally gentle for an individual with tactile hypersensitivity. The gesture itself was a profound declaration of trust. When he lowered his head to kiss her, there was zero hesitation. It was a definitive, urgent, and powerful connection, a subject finally acquiring a clear signal after a lifetime of sensory static. Harper encircled his neck with her arms, returning the kiss, feeling the solid, grounding reality of him. In an existence predicated on violence, this was the only authentic element. Their period of stability lasted for precisely 2 months. Leo had restructured the family's finances, tripling legitimate revenue by transitioning from street-level crime to corporate espionage. But Matteo remained a phantom presence, liquidating funds and incubating in his own toxic pathology. The resolution emerged from a detail so minuscule, only a mind like Leo's could discern it. They were in the compound's library, rain patterning the windows, a grim echo of the night Matteo attempted to murder them. Leo was analyzing encrypted invoices for his father's care when his digits froze. Harper, Leo stated, his voice turning hollow and dangerous. She approached with 2 mugs of hot liquid. What is it? My father's trust, the one he supposedly transferred to me clean. Tennis. Leo indicated a nearly imperceptible routing instruction on the display. There is a dormant command embedded within the code. Every Thursday, it transfers exactly $25,000 to a shell corporation in Delaware. Harper's brow furrowed. Who controls the company? I have just backtraced the IP address that accesses the account. The signal originates from a router in a derelict sector of the Brooklyn Navy Yard. Leo looked up, a muscle firing in his jaw. My father is financing Matteo's campaign. He is paying for the assassins my brother dispatches for me. A profound, sickening chill permeated Harper. Dominic had chosen his violent, treacherous firstborn. Leo, I am so sorry. Do not be. It is merely another data point. It means my final moral constraint has been removed, Leo said, but Harper noted the fine tremor in his hand. The betrayal was a sharp psychological wound, even as his mind attempted to categorize it as a tactical issue. We will dispatch Silas and his team to the Navy Yard, Harper stated, her tone resolute. No, Leo countered, rising to his feet. Mateo anticipates Silas. The entire district is a kill zone. He desires a firefight. He gazed out at the sprawling urban lights. He will use the chaos to vanish while our assets are neutralized. Mateo is a predator, but he understands my cognitive processes. He knows a decaying, overstimulating environment like that is my weakness. He selected it to be my cage. Then you are not going. That is the final word, Harper declared, her voice like iron. It must be me, Leo said, his gaze meeting hers. If I do not excise this malignancy myself, the captains will perpetually question if their unorthodox new leader is capable of cruelty. He must be broken, but not with a firearm. For the subsequent 12 hours, Leo vanished, constructing a complex masterpiece from pure code. He did not rest. The water Harper provided went largely untouched. He was architecting a virtual prison. At 2 a.m., a tactical vehicle moved toward the Brooklyn Navy Yard. Enormous, decaying cranes stood like skeletal sentinels against a glowing, polluted sky. The air was thick with the odor of salt, decomposition, and chemical waste. Leo was seated inside, insulated, noise-canceling earbuds secured in place, and a custom Kevlar vest concealed by his jacket. Harper sat beside him, having refused to remain behind. 4 minutes to mainframe access, Leo announced, his eyes fixed on a plain black watch. Silas has the entire perimeter covered by marksmen, Harper confirmed, her hand resting firmly upon his knee. If Mateo makes one hostile move, this concludes. They exited the SUV into the vast interior of Warehouse 4. The sensory assault was immediate. Wind howled through fractured skylights, a chaotic orchestration of rattling metal and dripping water. Leo's respiration faltered, his entire body becoming rigid. Harper moved closer, her shoulder a human point of contact against his arm. Follow my cadence, she breathed. Left, then right, then left. They proceeded toward the center of the immense, dimly lit space. Well, look what we have, a voice echoed from a high steel catwalk. Mateo emerged from the shadows, flanked by 4 gunmen. He was disheveled, his expensive suit creased, his eyes alight with a manic energy. I never believed you had the fortitude to appear, Leo, Mateo taunted, his voice reverberating off the metal surfaces. Is this sensory input excessive for you? Do the frightening sounds cause you distress? Leo's focus remained on his tablet, not on the unstable individual above. Mateo, you have 60 seconds to order your men to lower their weapons and surrender to Silas, Leo stated, his voice perfectly modulated. Mateo produced a harsh, grating laugh. Are you delusional? I hold the tactical advantage. I possess the armaments. Father gave you the assets, but in this world, force is the only true power. Target the female. Let's observe how my brother processes this. The mercenaries aimed their weapons at Harper. Her heart seized as she braced for the impact. Leo displayed no emotional response, his finger poised over the tablet. Then the colossal bay doors slammed shut, the impact thundering as Leo's program sealed every egress. Simultaneously, the lights extinguished, plunging the warehouse into near-total darkness, broken only by emergency lighting. "What have you done?" Mateo shrieked, his voice fracturing with pure terror. "Restore the lights!" But his men were visually incapacitated. Before they could activate night vision, Leo tapped the screen once more. Abruptly, every piece of machinery in the shipyard activated in a deafening sonic wave. Metal ground against metal. Hydraulics screamed. The very structure seemed to vibrate. On the catwalk, the gunmen collapsed, clutching their heads as a feedback loop engineered by Leo transformed the address system into a sonic weapon. He had constructed a prison of weaponized auditory chaos. On the ground level, Leo was placid. The agonizing frequency was perfectly negated by his and Harper's earpieces, reducing the sonic attack to a low hum. He glanced up at Mateo, who was now on his knees and screaming in agony, his weapon discarded to cover his ears. Leo had converted a sensory hellscape into an offensive tool, forcing his brother to experience a sample of his reality. Silas's team advanced, equipped with noise-canceling headsets. They systematically neutralized the incapacitated gunmen, securing and removing them from the warehouse. With the final, precise action, Leo establishes his authority. The industrial noise ceases, the electronics fall silent, and the subsequent vacuum feels more oppressive than the sound it displaced. On the floor, Mateo struggles for air, the pressure having ruptured the blood vessels in his nose. Silas drags him down the stairs, depositing him at Leo's feet like a damaged offering. The arrogance in Mateo's eyes has vanished, supplanted by a primal terror. He now realizes he confronts not a sibling, but a power he cannot comprehend. "Leo," he rasps, "we are family." But Leo regards the man who orchestrated his childhood torment with a cold, utter vacancy. There is only the sterile satisfaction of a resolved equation. You are an unacceptable anomaly in a system that requires perfection. Leo's voice resonated in the large chamber. Your behavior is erratic, violent, and it threatened the primary constant that maintains my operational stability. Stepping back, his hand made contact with Harper's. "Silas," Leo commanded, his focus fixed on Mateo. "Transport him to the shipyard. He has a non-negotiable one-way assignment on a tanker bound for the West African oil fields. The crew expects a laborer. Should he return, a termination order has been placed with local assets." "No, Leo, I beg you, Spice," Mateo shouted, his resistance futile. "Terminate me now. Do not assign me to that." "Termination would be a mercy," Leo responded, his voice devoid of affect. "Instead, you will exist with the sensation of total impotence in an uncontrollable environment." As Silas removed the broken subject, Harper exhaled slowly, her own composure fractured. Leo's strategy was elegant, a hostile takeover suppressed without a single discharge. He turned to her, the cold strategist persona receding, exposing the individual who required her to dampen his sensory overload. He removed his auditory dampeners, flinching at the unfiltered sound of the downpour. "All deviant factors have been neutralized," he reported, his respiration irregular. "The system is in equilibrium." "It is," Harper affirmed, moving to ground him with physical contact. "My progenitor's medical prognosis is less than a week," Leo stated, resting his head against hers. "His cardiac function is failing. Upon his cessation, all assets transfer to me." "Oh, are you prepared for that level of systemic load?" she inquired, her gaze meeting his unwavering one. "A billion-dollar operation is merely a logical problem. But human subjects, they are a syntax I cannot parse without you, Harper. I cannot command a room of predators unless you are my axis." From his jacket, he produced a small velvet case. He abstained from kneeling. Aware she viewed the ritual as illogical, he simply opened it, displaying a flawless, emerald-cut diamond of severe geometric clarity. "I am not configured for normative courtship," Leo stated with clinical honesty. "I cannot guarantee a conventional existence. The projections indicate significant difficulties, but I can guarantee you my unconditional allegiance. You are the single variable I will never attempt to manipulate. Be my associate, Harper. Assist me in managing the system." Her focus shifted from the diamond to his eyes, recalling the terrified boy overwhelmed by sensory input. She then perceived the alpha he had become, a man who had re-architected his environment to suit his cognition. A smile cut through her tears as she placed her hand on his. "I am your constant, Leo," she murmured. "Apply the ring. Let's return to base." Leo Moretti's assumption of control marked a profound, systemic evolution in the annals of organized crime. Physical aggression was recontextualized from a display of power to a failure in strategic foresight. Guided by Leo's cold logic and insulated by Harper's regulation, the syndicate evolved into a discrete institutional power. His lieutenants began discussing profit margins and network vulnerabilities instead of eliminations and intimidation. The overt theatrics of the Dominic era receded, supplanted by the lethal efficiency of a corporate headquarters. Harper Davis had not merely pacified a pathology, she had installed herself as the functional director of his silent network. She served as the conduit that enabled his brilliant, isolated intellect to interface with the external world. Their alliance was evidence of a new power paradigm, one that forgoes ostentation in favor of calculation, adaptation, and the safeguarding of critical assets from external threats. The troubled anomaly of the Moretti lineage had finally achieved homeostasis, and in doing so, he established a new operational rhythm to which the rest of the world would be forced to adapt.